this is the first in a series of 3 Anxiety Toolbox sessions. These are kind of a brief primer on anxiety, and they're really designed just to be a rapid fire introduction to anxiety, some quick tools and coping mechanisms. There are other programs that are happening that are more in all-encompassing. This one is just really a quick and dirty, get some information, get some quick coping skills, and we'll be kind of building on each session over the next 3 weeks. So I'm Kerri. I'm the Coffee and Conversation Counselor. I have a private practice in Riverview, New Brunswick called Coverdale Counselling and Consulting. And I partner with the Canadian Mental Health Association of New Brunswick for these webinars, for various support groups, and lots of other great programs. And I'm proud to participate and collaborate with them on a regular basis. So welcome to this Friday session of Your Anxiety Toolbox. This is session 1, Anxiety 101. So it is Friday of the long weekend, and we are probably all experiencing some mixed emotions around that because it is a different long weekend than probably we've ever experienced. If you're feeling a little bit of anxiety around that, that's not surprising, and it's okay. You're not alone. So we want to first identify, I'm going to sneeze, excuse me, sorry. Maybe not. The differences between everyday stress and anxiety disorder. So what's important to note is that everyday stress is really a response to a known environmental factor, whereas an anxiety disorder is a response to an unknown source or a response to the experience of stress itself. With everyday stress, our symptoms go away when the stressor goes away. Makes sense, right? I've got some spelling errors. In an anxiety disorder, symptoms remain despite no identifiable stressor that we can look at and say, okay, it's that thing, it's that thing, it's that thing. As you can see, everyday anxiety or stress comes up in the form of worrying about work, maybe passing a class, maybe a romantic breakup, other important life events, moving, buying a car, etc. With the anxiety disorder, we're looking at constant, unsubstantiated worry that causes, and this is important, significant distress and interferes with your daily life. And that's an important piece to remember, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. Stress involves embarrassment or self-consciousness in uncomfortable or awkward social situations, feeling nervous about meeting new people, but it passes. If it's an anxiety disorder, it's an absolute avoidance of those social situations due to fear of being judged, embarrassed, humiliated, and a belief that it might last forever. When we talk about stress, we may feel nervous or sweaty before a big test, a work presentation, stage performance, athletic event, or other significant event. Whereas with an anxiety disorder, we experience panic attacks that seem out of the blue and have a preoccupation with the fear of having another panic attack. And again, we will talk about panic attacks again a little bit later. Everyday stress or everyday anxiety is a realistic fear of a dangerous object, a dangerous place, a dangerous situation. You know, if you were living in the southern US, for example, a fear of poisonous snakes or poisonous spiders, that would be a rational and appropriate fear. Anxiety disorder brings with it irrational fear or avoidance of that object, that place, that situation that poses little to no real threat. So perhaps, as I've shared in the example, a fear of elevators. That would be more of an anxiety disorder type thing. Everyday anxiety or stress is really about making sure that you are healthy and living in a safe environment, whereas anxiety disorder is about performing uncontrollable repetitive actions such as excessive cleaning, checking, touching, or arranging to ensure that our environment is safe and healthy. So there definitely are some distinctions there. If you're wondering, excuse me, whether you or someone you love has normal, and I'm going to put that in air quotes because what is normal anyway, has normal anxiety, everyday stress, or has an anxiety disorder, these are good markers. This is a good kind of back and forth to make that distinction. What we need to remember is that if there is a significant impairment in our daily lives, that's where we see anxiety disorder. When our anxiety interferes to the point where we are experiencing disruption in our enjoyment, when in children they are experiencing those extreme feelings more frequently or intensely than peers their own age, whereas adults, we are experiencing that disruption in our work schedules, our social interactions. These are when everyday stress has morphed into an anxiety disorder. So, oops, I have to use my mouse, not the keyboard. We need to understand certain things about anxiety. So this is the 101, understanding anxiety. It is normal. It is an adaptive experience. What does that mean? It means that it's a thing that allows us to prepare for challenging situations. Anxiety disorders are characterized by that significant impairment, that distress, that difficulty in general function. And that's that really big distinction there. It's important to make note of that. Normal anxiety becomes problematic when it is excessive, when it feels uncontrollable, when you experience it as being intrusive in your life, when it is persistent, when it's always around, and when it causes you significant distress or impairs your ability to go about your daily life. Have you noticed that I've repeated that phrasing several times? Because it is so critical to remember that it's a disorder if it's impairing your capacity for enjoyment or impairing your ability to function as you would normally choose to do. So there are 11 different categories of anxiety disorders, 11 classifications. They are distinct. We've heard of them all probably at different times, but we're going to talk about them just in brief. So you'll see all 11 of them here, and we're just going to move into each of them in a little brief description. So starting with our body-focused repetitive behaviors, BFRBs, these are really habitual behaviors. These are things like hair pulling, skin picking, nail biting, nail picking, nose picking, lip or cheek biting. These are those, it's really focused on the body and it's repetitive. Oftentimes the person isn't even aware that they're doing it. These provide some sort of comfort or relief, and we could talk about that in another session, but the key part is that it causes significant impairment, again, that same phrase, or disruption in the routine life or functioning for the individual. The second is generalized anxiety disorder, and this is the one that, a lot of people are very familiar with. This is that excessive worrying, uncontrollable worrying. Children who have this are often described as worry warts. People who live with generalized anxiety disorder often have a fear of bad things happening in the future. There's that future looking with fear. Health anxiety is the next one, and it's not a specific disorder per se, but it is excessive anxiety related to our somatic or physical symptoms. So something going on in our body. These worries are excessive, they're ongoing, they're uncontrollable, and they're absolutely related to our health. So those are the next category of anxiety disorders. Hoarding disorder. Like we've all seen episodes of Hoarders, I'm sure. And this is something that has really become in the public eye. People are starting to recognize it as a disorder. This is an ongoing, significant difficulty in getting rid of possessions regardless of their value. So that's interesting, right? It's not about acquiring, it's not about acquisition of high value items necessarily. It's about acquisition and holding onto anything. There'd be a strong urge to save and or acquire, and if prevented from acquiring or saving, it can lead to extreme distress. So sometimes in children, I'll see it show up as hanging on to broken toys, for example. Keeping collections of, torn papers. In an adult, in some of the shows that you've seen, you might see like stacks and stacks and stacks and stacks and stacks of newspapers or magazines. So it shows up in different ways. But again, if that person is prevented from hoarding, from acquiring or saving, they get very distressed about it. Next is obsessive compulsive disorder, and we've all heard of OCD, and we tend to think of it in terms of the way it's presented in the media, in the movies by Hollywood. It does show up like that sometimes, but not always the case. In OCD, we tend to think it's about excessive cleaning and organization and being very precise about how we place things and order things. That can be it, but it's also unwanted thoughts, unwanted images, unwanted urges or obsessions that make the person feel very anxious, very uncomfortable. The person who's living with OCD engages in compulsions, repetitive physical or mental behaviors that could be light switching, counting something off, etc. And the purpose of that repetitive behavior, that compulsion, is to reduce their anxiety or discomfort. So this could be the tapping, the mental routines, the hand washing, the checking for things to be unplugged before leaving the home, etc. The next disorder in the list of disorders is panic disorder and agoraphobia. Many people have experienced panic attacks, and we're going to talk a little bit more specifically about those shortly. But in short, it is a sudden, intense onset of fear. Then, at least 1 month of worrying about additional panic attacks and or fear of something bad happening as a result of the panic attack. So people can have a panic attack in isolation. That does not equate to panic disorder. Panic disorder requires the onset, followed by that intense fear. Some of the symptoms of panic disorder include that rapid heart rate, the tightness of the chest. A lot of people who have had a panic attack will describe believing in that moment that they were having a heart attack, that they were going to die. It can vary, excuse me, it can vary significantly from person to person, but there is that consistent belief that they are in serious mortal harm. Sorry, I think I may lose my voice here. Next up is post-traumatic stress disorder. We've heard of PTSD. We hear about it a lot. We recognize it as a true thing. I think a lot of people don't understand that it's actually an anxiety disorder. The other thing that we don't recognize necessarily is that it does not require going to war, being in a motor vehicle accident, being in a fire. It can develop after being directly involved with a traumatic event, witnessing a traumatic event, or even learning about via news, social media, newspaper, overhearing a frightening or traumatic event. Being directly involved, witnessing, or hearing about. And I think we sometimes are not aware that PTSD can appear from any of those things. It is extremely debilitating. It is more than just being upset for a few days after a traumatic experience. Someone who is living with PTSD has ongoing symptoms, upsetting vivid images, memories, flashbacks, nightmares, an increased arousal state. They're jumpy, they're irritable, they're short-tempered, they're quick to startle, and they will do anything they can to avoid reminders of the incident, to shut it down. And that's post-traumatic stress. Social anxiety disorder is one we often associate with children. That fear of performance, we call it maybe performance anxiety. That fear of social situations, worry about doing something embarrassing or being negatively judged by others. This is one that shows up a lot in middle school. It's the avoidance of social activities, right? And maybe it's, if you're an adult, and it's about maybe feeling very apprehensive, nervous, scared, panicked about presenting something at work, having to speak up in a meeting. Those are the ways that that can present. Selective mutism is one that a lot of people don't talk about, but it is an anxiety disorder. Again, typically in children, this one, and often children will, through good therapy, move out of this into adulthood. But this is when someone consistently does not speak in certain situations, but comfortably speaks in other situations. So this doesn't mean the person is incapable of speech. It means they are capable of speech, but in certain social situations are rendered incapable. What's interesting is that these very same people, these very same children, for example, may speak openly with those people with whom they have a shared experience or with whom they're comfortable, and can even be considered a chatterbox in the right set of circumstances. So I find that's really an interesting disorder. Separation anxiety, typically we believe it's only children, but adults experience it too. And this is excessive anxiety about being separated from those you care about or from your home. When it is presenting, you may not be able to be alone in a different room from your partner, your child, your parent, even in the context of being in your own home. For those of you who may be parents, this would be when you have that child who just follows you from room to room to room, follows you to the bathroom, follows you to the kitchen, and then is very, very distraught, inconsolable when you need to leave or take them to childcare or school, etc. This would be the adult who feels overwhelmed and anxious when their partner leaves for work, or if they have to leave the home to go somewhere else. And finally, we have phobias. Phobias are not just kind of those rational fears of a poisonous snake if you live in the southern states, for example, but it's a persistent, excessive, and unreasonable fear of an object or situation. So, what would be an unreasonable fear? I am here in Riverview, New Brunswick in May, in my office. It would be unreasonable for me to be fearing black widow spiders in my office. Okay, that would be an unreasonable fear. When that then becomes a phobia is if I won't go into my office because there's curtains and there's books, and that's a place where I might fear that the spider is hiding. It's significantly interfering with my life. If I'm unable to control that fear, it becomes that phobia. So it requires persistence, significant interference, and an inability to be controlled. And phobias run a very, very, very broad spectrum of fears. And too many to get into in this context, but they could be around almost anything. So we need to recognize where anxiety shows up. It shows up in our affect, which is emotionally and physically, what we feel in our body. It shows up in our behavior, what we do, our actions, such as reassurance-seeking behaviors. In our cognition, this is mentally what goes through our mind, our worrisome thoughts, those uncontrollability thoughts. Dependence, this is relying overly on people around us, on our support networks. It shows up as being excessive and extreme in relation to the situation, to the circumstances, and it shows up in how it impacts our daily functioning. So, as I mentioned about affect, it is about our body. Anxiety is ultimately an emotion that is felt in the body. Different people will describe anxiety as showing up differently in their body, but there are some commonalities. It can show up as chest pain or discomfort, tightness, heaviness, discomfort in the pain or pain in the stomach, nausea, diarrhea, reflux. You may feel dizzy or lightheaded, foggy, a feeling of detachment or a sense of things being unreal, feeling exceptionally hot or exceptionally cold. Some people describe a lump in the throat or feeling as if they're choking. Headaches, numbness or tingling. You may feel clenching in your jaw, tightness in the back of the neck. You might feel your shoulders are tense, rapid heart rate, rapid breathing or breath holding alternately, sweating, flushing, trembling, shaking. Doesn't this sound delightful, right? So many awesome things. If 4 or more of these symptoms happen suddenly, within a few minutes of each other, and intensely, that is very likely a panic attack. So here I've shared kind of what our stress system, our threat system looks like. This is where things show up in our body. So to give you just a visual of where all of those things happen, this is really an illustration of the fight or flight response. And we'll talk about that again a little bit later, the fight, flight, or freeze response. But you see that throughout the body, we have multiple responses. So regarding behavior, anxious people avoid. We avoid. In a situation of real threat, fight, flight, or freeze can keep us safe. But in the case of avoidance, we learn negative coping skills, and we don't learn healthy coping skills. When we avoid, we don't engage in appropriate activities. We don't engage in those kinds of activities that are age appropriate, that are challenging, that are engaging for us. This is a problem because our behavior has now been fundamentally impacted by our anxiety. Excuse me. When we're talking about cognition or our brains, anxious people worry, right? People who are living with anxiety worry. They can be about a current situation. For example, here in well, I have to say here in Brunswick, but here in the whole world, COVID-19, something that is a current situation. People may be worried about that. Or they may be worried about some future event. Parents and school-age children may be worried about, what does school look like coming up? What does that even happen? How does that work? With our cognitions, when we're in the throes of anxiety, we may not even be able to identify the anxious thought. We may not be able to identify it as an anxious thought. It may seem like a rational, real, appropriate response to the situation. In our cognitions, our thoughts can range from reasonable, you didn't study for the test and so you think, oh, I'm going to fail this exam, to the remote. If I go to a restaurant, I will get sick and die. So there's kind of that full spectrum of the kinds of thoughts that we have when we're thinking about the cognitive impact of anxiety. When we live with anxiety, we have a greater dependence. We tend to rely on and depend on friends, parents, partners, far more than our same-aged peers, far more than our peers who are in the same stages of development, whether child, youth, or adult. We seek reassurance. We ask supports to do things for them that seem unnecessary. When I had severe postpartum anxiety, I would try to get my husband to do the grocery shopping because I had a fear of it, even though it was something that I had previously enjoyed. It is absolutely normal and helpful and appropriate to ask for new information when we're learning new things or seeking comfort when we're scared. That's absolutely appropriate. However, when we're anxious, when we live with anxiety, we may ask the same questions over and over and over again, or demand comfort in non-threatening situations. If you're a parent of a child with anxiety, it may be that child asks you, are you picking me up on time? Are you sure you're going to be there? Are you definitely going to be there at this time? That could be that kind of asking the same question over and over again. We'll often ask others to do things for us or just be available just in case something goes wrong, or just in case the feared outcome happens, however unlikely it may be. And that's what dependence looks like in anxiety. Anxious people worry in excess. They worry to an extreme. They worry about more things more often and in more extreme ways than their peers do. So it's not just one thing. It's not just one thing once. It's multiple things, multiple times, and in extreme ways. People who are living with anxiety aren't just worried about saying the wrong thing once or twice, goofing, because we all goof, we all make mistakes, we're all human. They are afraid they will say this wrong thing repeatedly, and they're absolutely afraid of being judged harshly by their peers, by their coworkers, by their colleagues, by their family members. They're so afraid of embarrassing themselves absolutely beyond repair for the rest of their lives. That is exhausting. That is absolutely emotionally exhausting to live with that. And finally, function. The daily lives of people who live with anxiety are typically severely impacted by that anxiety. Perhaps functioning at a lower level than peers, if we're talking about children. Perhaps struggling to get up and get ready for work in the morning. Often late to work or other engagements, or often forget things at home, misplace items. People who are living with anxiety can have impaired functioning by appearing disorganized, unfocused. They may fail to reach their full potential, and if they do, it's due to extreme efforts, like really hard work to get there. It requires so much more engagement. It impairs social functioning, right? Missing out on social engagements, on recreational activities due to fear, missing out on course, we're not living that right now, but missing out on parties, missing out on dinner engagements, missing out on going to a show with friends or a sports activity. And these are opportunities to learn more skills, not just the actual functional skills of playing a sport or playing an instrument or singing a song, but the actual coping skill of being around other humans. And those are missed out on when we live with anxiety. It is absolutely an impairment of function. And those who live with anxiety often experience more conflict with their families than is typical for other people. And part of the reason for that is that anxiety often shows up as anger. And a lot of people don't realize that. They'll say, oh, so-and-so has an anger problem. And when we dig in deeper, we find out that it's actually an anxiety issue. So, sorry, I am losing my breath with these allergies. What do we need to know about anxiety? It's normal. Whatever the heck normal is these days, anxiety is normal. It is a natural human experience. Every single human experiences anxiety from time to time. Anxiety can alert us to threats. It can protect us from danger. It can help us to reach important goals by challenging us. If you think about standing on the start line of a race or getting ready to shoot that goal for the championship, that gets us to their goals. If you're worried about walking downtown a busy city street or a dark city street, at 3 o'clock in the morning by yourself, that might protect you from danger if you're feeling a little anxiety. Okay, so it is an important part of functioning well as a human. Anxiety in itself is not dangerous. It's uncomfortable. That is absolutely accurate. However, it is temporary and will eventually decrease. The sensations that we experience in anxiety are actually designed to alert us, to activate our bodies to action, to activate our minds to action, to response. They are a normal part of that response mechanism. And our bodies are smart enough to know when to amp up and when to calm down. Usually. Anxiety is typically adaptive. Helps us prepare for real dangers. Performance gets us out there pushing at our best, performing at our best, being optimal. Anxiety triggers that fight, flight, freeze response, prepares our body for action. And without it, we wouldn't survive. We need some anxiety. It is ultimately a part of our life. And eliminating it completely is virtually impossible. Even though sometimes people say, I want to get rid of my anxiety completely. No, not going to happen. Anxiety becomes a problem for a lot of people. Small doses are helpful, right, in certain situations, but worrying much of your time, avoiding fun activities, refusing to go to work because of anxiety is a problem. If we think of it like a fog, and I live in southeast New Brunswick along the Petitcodiac River, so we see lots of fog, right? And sometimes I'm driving home and I can't see anything. Anxiety can be like that. It can distort our reality so that we can't see what we normally do. Makes it hard to see. It stops us from doing what we normally do. Normally if I would drive at 80 kilometers an hour, maybe I have to slow down to 30 because the visibility is so bad. And emotionally, anxiety can do the same thing. It just generally gets in the way. And this is when anxiety is a problem. So, although it is normal and essential for survival, some of us get to that place where we never grew out of the stranger danger phase, that fear of the unknown. And rather than adapting and growing, we become more rather than less afraid as we mature. And this is that ongoing fear, that excessive fear that can begin to cause that significant distress, that interference in everyday life. And it's this combination of excessive anxiety and disruption that helps us understand when anxiety is no longer normal and helpful and has become problematic. So let's talk about the 3 Fs, the fight, flight, or freeze. This is our body's automatic built-in system designed to protect us from threat or danger. When you hear the words, look out, you automatically move. You'd be surprised at how rapidly you can move. And maybe thankfully so. Maybe you're at a hockey game and the puck goes flying by your head. You're shocked at how quickly you can be activated. Or maybe you're hiking and you see a bear up on the trail and you stop and you freeze and you remain completely still and quiet until it moves on. In both of these scenarios, our body's system was activated and demonstrated its effectiveness in protecting us from danger. In an anxiety disorder, that system is malfunctioning a little. It's triggered into action when we believe there is a threat, even when there is not, when we have a perception of threat. When all those sensations come together quickly, we call this the panic attacks that I talked about before. What we need to remember is that panic attacks are ultimately harmless, but because of our fear of this combination of sensations coming together all at once, we are scared. We are feeling horrible, and it can hurt. It can actually physically hurt when you have a panic attack. Some of the ways in which it shows up in our body, so when the F3 response is triggered, is activated, our fingers. So you may feel that your fingers are cold, numb, tingly, because the blood is moving from our fingers towards bigger muscles like our biceps, because we need the energy in those muscles to fight or to run. Because we're maybe breathing too fast or too hard or too deeply, we could feel lightheaded. We could be hyperventilating. Not dangerous, but not great. Our body is really just trying to get more oxygen and blood to those larger muscles so we can either fight, run, or hold still. In our arm muscles, you can feel the muscles in your arms start to tense up. You may feel tenseness in your shoulders, in your biceps, your triceps. You might feel that your sweat glands are working really hard because your energy is increasing as you're prepared to fight, run, or to be still. This is cooling down your body, right? But it still feels like hot. Your heart is pounding, it's pumping. So it's preparing your body again for action. It's pumping that blood to those major muscle groups, giving you that energy to strike out at the danger or to run away as fast as you can. Those large muscles in your thighs are tensing up. You'll feel, maybe some people describe a heaviness in your thighs, but that's because they're getting ready to spring into action, those big muscles. The toes will behave much like your fingers do, blood draining away from them to give blood and oxygen to the larger muscle groups. These are all normal things that happen when the F3, the fight, flight, or freeze response is activated. However, they can feel overwhelming and scary. And that's okay. One of the things that shows up sometimes in anxiety is the stomach, right? I had someone describe butterflies with teeth. We talk about having butterflies in your stomach. Well, somebody described their anxiety as butterflies with teeth. And I'm like, man, those are some seriously aggressive butterflies. I can appreciate that imagery, right? Our stomach gets really upset. A lot of acid, getting churned around. Other systems in your body are slowing down, and digestion is one of them. So we start to feel like everything else is working well, but our digestive system is not. Our eyes, pupils get big to let in more light so we can spot the danger better. But this has the effect of making something seem brighter, something seems fuzzier, and we may even see like dancing spots. I do realize I talk a lot with my hands. I apologize. So all this to say, anxiety is real. If you live with anxiety, there's some things that are not helpful to hear. If you're loving someone who lives with anxiety, here are some things that are not helpful to say. Don't worry, it's no big deal. You'll be fine, nothing to be afraid of. You just need to sleep more. I'll do it. There's that dependence. It's all in your head. Hurry up. Stop thinking about it. I don't know what you need. These are not helpful things. Ultimately, these boil down to saying to someone, calm down. And nowhere in the history of the world has anyone calmed down from being told to calm down. Right? Am I wrong? I certainly wouldn't. So, what's next? What's next in Anxiety 101? To take care of anxiety, we need to take care of ourselves. This is critical. We need to find ways to reduce our stress. Working long hours or taking on too much too quickly can sap us, rob us of much needed energy. And I know I'm saying stuff that is, we intellectually know, but the space between here and here is sometimes a really big distance between the intellect and the heart, or between knowledge and action. When we are low in energy, so I've just identified that our energy is often sapped or drained from working too much and taking on too many tasks, working too long hours. And I know a lot of people are very much struggling with that, with working from home right now, working more than they normally would, or being available all the time. We become low in energy. When we're low in energy, we can easily become irritable. Remember I said that anger is a manifestation of anxiety? Well, irritation is just another kind of anger, right? We'll find it impossible to do the things that we used to do with ease if we have high stress. So limiting what we do each day is critical to our well-being. And this can mean, creating a schedule, setting limits. The word I love is boundaries, right? And really digging into that and understanding ways that you can reduce your stress. Take care. What are some ways to take care? Well, grab small amounts of time to care for yourself each day and week. And I recognize that, massive, large actions of self-care can be very challenging, right? Especially right now, because we have kind of strange restrictions about what we can and cannot do currently. But micro actions can be very helpful. And I think we sometimes forget how helpful those micro actions truly can be. So those small breaks can really impact us in very positive ways. Take 5 minutes to talk to a friend. Like literally pick up the phone and make a call and hear someone else's voice. Get some fresh air. Like step outside. I make a point, I'm sitting doing teletherapy sessions all day. I make a point between sessions to get up, walk outside my office, breathe, and come back in. Does it take me 2 hours? No, it takes me 3 minutes, but it's breaking the pattern, moving my body, and doing something good for me. Get a cup of tea. I didn't say coffee, even though I love coffee. There's something about the ritual of making a cup of tea that has that element of self-care. My great-grandfather was British, and my golly, if I didn't boil the water, put boiling water into the teapot to get it hot first, use loose tea, not bagged tea, thank you very much. There was a whole process to tea. If you've ever been privileged to attend a Japanese tea ceremony, you understand the ritual importance of a cup of tea. Doing something as simple as that, hearing the water boil, preparing the tea, smelling it, listening to the water as you pour it into the teapot. Engaging all of your senses in that way is actually quite an incredible piece of self-care, and it's very grounding. If you can't do an entire activity, maybe your self-care ritual has been to go to the spa, but spas aren't open right now, consider doing part of an activity. Give yourself, a manicure, and maybe you can't do a whole manicure, so choose a lotion that you love and gently and lovingly massage it into your hands. And since we're all washing our hands so frequently right now, what a wonderful act of self-care to put some moisturizing cream on our hands. As we're taking care of ourselves, it is equally important to seek support. We are all in this together. And I don't just mean a global pandemic, I mean life. You don't have to do things alone. Talk with friends, meet with a counselor, meet with a trusted mentor, consult with your pastor, your spiritual leader. Know that there are other people out there, others who can provide that empathy, that connection, who can give you something to laugh about together, something to share a laugh about. Follow people on social media that make you laugh. Follow somebody's TikTok account that just cracks you up. That's a kind of support because you're engaging in that laughter. Consider joining an online forum for people who are experiencing things like you. Make those peer-to-peer connections and talk to someone who really gets it. That's why peer groups are so valuable. That's why support groups have such power. When we feel connected, we feel supported. And when we feel supported, we can feel stronger. And it's really an important piece of managing and mitigating anxiety. Part of taking care, of course, is nourishing our bodies. It can be really easy when we're caught up in anxiety to skip healthy meals, to grab what's convenient. But when we eat well and get the daily nutrition that we actually need, we do better. I know that I'm at risk when I go through the drive-through, right? When I go through the drive-through, I know that's a clear indicator that my anxiety is creeping up, that my stress is increasing. When I haven't prepared healthy meals, when I haven't meal prepped, when I haven't packed a healthy lunch, these are indicators for me that my stress is on the rise. When I've eaten a healthy meal, when I've taken the time to sit down at the table and eat, as opposed to, going quickly through a meal, I feel better. If you don't have a history of really healthy eating, of nourishing your body, try one meal or try adding one healthy choice to your meal. If you find because of your work, your schedule, that you're hitting the drive-through frequently, great. That works for you. Try adding one healthy option to your choices. Get the salad instead of the fries. Although don't get me wrong, McDonald's fries are kind of awesome. Love them. Okay? If you can, take some time each week to meal plan. Shop for healthy foods that can be grabbed on the go. If you don't have the time yourself to, peel vegetables, slice them, make those things ready for you, there's a lot of pre-prepared, pre-cut, pre-peeled foods that you can access. Maybe consider a food exchange, asking family members to cook for you one evening a week. Perhaps you're experiencing a particularly stressful time, and you could say, look, I really need some help right now. Would you cook a meal this week? And I know that during a global pandemic, we're not necessarily doing that, but this is long-term action. Meal sharing is an important part of connection. How many of you are getting appropriate sleep? With anxiety disorders, sleep is often the first thing to go. And in self-care, sleep is often the first thing to go. People who live with anxiety talk about disrupted sleep, whether it's insomnia, so an inability to fall asleep, waking frequently, restless sleep. Sleep is easily disrupted with anxiety. Quality rest is so important to our self-care. And there are so many things that can negatively impact our sleep, that can negatively impact our healthy sleep. So for example, spending too much time on the screen right before bed, that's a doozy, right? That's a big one. So practicing some really healthy and appropriate sleep hygiene is going to be part of your homework if you're planning to come back for next week's session. Get into a sleep hygiene routine. So sleep hygiene includes getting regular, going to bed and getting up at more or less the same time every day. Even weekends, even days off, even during a global pandemic. Going to bed and getting up at relatively close to the same time each day. Go to sleep only when you're tired, right? So if you haven't been able to fall asleep within 30 minutes of lying down, get up and do something calming, not something stimulating. Don't go for a run, right? Don't do jumping jacks in the living room. Do something calming. Read a book, do a yoga practice, meditate, pray, listen to a calming musical interlude. Do something not stimulating, but not in bed. Get up out of bed and do it, and then go back to bed when you start to feel sleepy again. and try again. That's step 2 in sleep hygiene. Avoid caffeine and nicotine before bed. Ideally, I know not realistically, but ideally for the last 4 to 6 hours before bed. Now, why? Because both caffeine and nicotine are stimulants. So this is coffee, tea, soda pop, chocolate. Those would be some caffeine sources. Nicotine is your cigarettes, your vaping, I think. I don't know enough about vaping to tell you that. Nicotine is a stimulant as well. If possible, avoid alcohol for the 4 to 6 hours before bed. And I know a lot of people say, well, I'm just having a nightcap. It helps me fall asleep. But in fact, alcohol actually disrupts the quality of sleep. So it's important to be aware of that. Try to remember that bed is for sleeping and one other activity. And it's not watching TV or checking Facebook. Right? Beds should be used for sleeping or sex only. When we start to add other activities to our bed, we create an idea that bed is for all kinds of things rather than rest. So bear that in mind. Avoid the blue screens. Get rid of those blue screens at least 60 minutes before bed. So that's the tablets, the phones, the laptops, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, at least an hour before bed. And I know that's really hard because we have become conditioned to checking, like just being like, check, 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 check all the time. That's our conditioning. But we can change that, right? Because we are autonomous humans who can make choices. It can be really helpful for good sleep hygiene as well to choose the right space, making sure your bedroom is quiet and comfortable, dark. So maybe earplugs or a sleep mask, depending on your circumstances. Maybe practice a sleep ritual. Those of us who are parents know that we create sleep rituals for our children around bath, story, song, tuck in. Well, as adults, we need those sleep rituals as well. Perhaps it's practicing some meditative breathing, a progressive relaxation. Maybe it's in moisturizing your hands or your face, some sort of ritual that is about getting ready for bed. And if possible, I know this is a hard one, if possible, avoid checking the clock during the night. That look and look and look. This can create some negative thoughts around the lines of, oh, I'm never going to get to sleep, or, oh, it's only this long until I have to get up. Why am I even bothering going to sleep? I'm never going to get any rest. I'm going to have a terrible day tomorrow. Just don't look at the clock. Just don't do it. Finally, if you can, and I know that this is something that may be difficult, but if you can, keep your daily routine as similar as possible. Create, a day-to-day. And yes, there are spontaneity. Yes, there are changes, but keep your daily routine fairly similar. Your daytime activities the same as you had planned, as opposed to massive disruptions. Sleep hygiene matters, and your sleep is foundational to recovering from anxiety. Taking care of you means having fun. Fun is different for every human, right? And it's okay to seek fun when either you or someone that you love is experiencing anxiety. In fact, it's really important because it helps us recharge our batteries. And telling someone that you love, you know what, I need to get out, I need to have a little fun so I have more energy to help you, so I have more energy to combat my own anxiety. This is modeling good behavior. This is modeling healthy actions. This is modeling good self-care. And it can help us remember that anxiety is not the only thing going on. So fun can look like so many different things, right? Going for a bike ride, watching a movie, cooking, baking, gardening, having a Zoom call or FaceTime with friends, having, blowing bubbles in the backyard with your kids. Fun is just unique to the individual. Have fun. I think we sometimes forget the importance of play and just laughter. Think about it. When's the last time you played? When's the last time you laughed out loud, belly laugh, the kind of laughter that just made you exhausted because you just couldn't stop? Fun is important. So have fun. So for your homework, I want you to practice breathing. You're saying, well, okay, I know how to breathe. I breathe all the time, breathe all day, every day. True. But we don't always do the kind of breathing that helps our anxiety. So we're going to practice what we call 4-7-8 breathing. And it's super simple. It's so easy. Okay? It is literally inhale through the nose for 4, hold for 7, exhale through the mouth for 8. 4, 7, 8. I want you to practice this when you're not filled with anxiety. I want you to practice this when you don't need it. I want you to practice this several times a day. A great way to remember to do this is that 4, 7, 8 adds up to 19. We have been encouraged to wash our hands for 20 seconds. Perfect time to practice your breathing. You have 20 seconds uninterrupted. Practice your 4, 7, 8 at that time. When we practice it outside of a high anxiety moment, it becomes more natural and reflexive, and it becomes that tool that we automatically reach for, as opposed to an awkward tool that we're not sure what to do with. So just like learning to use any new tool, this can feel awkward at first. So, if the only tool I've ever had is a hammer, and I'm trying to build a deck, and I've got deck screws, and I'm pounding them in with a hammer, it will get done. It won't be pretty, it won't be effective, but it will get done. When someone hands me a drill with a proper bit on it, it feels heavy, it feels unwieldy. I'm not sure how to handle it. But with practice, it actually becomes much more efficient. It becomes a better tool, and it becomes the one I reach for in those circumstances. So the homework is to practice the 4, 7, 8. And the second piece of homework is to practice STOP. STOP is an acronym. I love acronyms because they help us remember things. STOP is just this. When you notice, and notice is an important word, when you notice the first signs or symptoms of anxiety creeping in, perhaps it's an anxious thought, perhaps it's a racing heart or shallow breath, or maybe you're feeling flushed. When you notice the first sign or symptom of anxiety, I want you to picture a stop sign, big red octagon. And in your head or out loud, say stop. Okay, that's the first step. Stop. This is going to arrest the spiral of automatic negative thinking. So S, stop. T, take a breath. Well, hey, we've already been practicing our 4, 7, 8 breathing. We know how to do this now, so we're going to practice it now. 4, 7, 8. Stop, take a breath. What happens when we take those breaths is we actually reduce the production of our stress hormone, cortisol. We're dropping it down. Hey, that's a good thing, because cortisol is responsible for inflammation and for stress response, and elevated levels of cortisol for long periods of time can lead to heart attacks and stroke and all kinds of nasties. So just the simple act of breathing can reduce the cortisol. So stop, picture the stop sign. T, take a breath. O, observe. In that moment when the anxiety is creeping in, what are you actually thinking or feeling? What is actually going on? So imagine that a third party or an outside observer is seeing the situation. How would they describe it? What would they describe as going on? I sometimes give the description of maybe I'm driving my car and somebody cuts me off, and my first response is road rage. It's like, oof, I'm flushed with anger. But if I stop, like I don't stop my car, but if I stop and I take that breath and I observe what I'm actually feeling or thinking in that moment, I recognize that it wasn't anger. In fact, it was fear, because my kids were in the car and it scared me. So now I've identified my emotion. I've identified the feeling. And just like shining the light on the monster under the bed when you're a little kid and you turn that round and it's, oh, it's your Barbie dolls. Once we name it and shine a light on it, it's not so powerful. We've taken away the power. So stop, take a breath, observe. And finally, P, proceed with a proportional plan. Say that with me 5 times rapidly. Proceed with a proportional plan. What does that mean? Well, if I determined after that incident when someone cut me off that I was never going to drive again, or that I was never going to put my children in the car again, that would not be a proportional plan. A proportional plan would be a response as opposed to a reaction that says, oh, hey, I know that that route tends to be super congested. I'm going to take a different route next time. Or, you know what? Monday morning's traffic's pretty heavy. I'm going to leave a few minutes earlier. Or, you know what? I know that people are anxious and worried. I'm just going to be okay with the fact that I'm going to slow down and let people pass me. Proportional plan. So the homework, practice your 4-7-8 breathing several times a day whenever you wash your hands, and practice the stop whenever you feel that anxiety creeping in. Stop, take a breath, observe, proceed with a plan. So that's Anxiety 101. Any questions? It's not going to be emailed, but it will be posted on the YouTube channel. So you can review it. It'll be on the CMHA YouTube channel. And if you would like more specific details around it, you could certainly email me. My contact information will be coming up in a moment. Other questions? Any other questions? I think I saw one pop up here. Just a second. I'm looking. I know I saw a question in the chat. Okay. Oh, excuse me. I can't breathe. Oh, what is OCPD? Okay, so this is a personality disorder. It's a little bit different than OCD specifically. And, you know, personality disorder is a little bit outside the scope of this conversation. But typically, it would be characterized by that obsession with control over the environment and a need to do things their way as opposed to relying on others or trusting others to do things. OCPD is often what we might call a comorbid disorder. It shows up alongside other mental health concerns like OCD, like disordered eating, like hoarding disorder, like substance use disorders. So it is a little bit different. It's in a cluster of other disorders. It's not super common. I think, and don't quote me on this number, but I think it's somewhere around 6 to 7% of the population experiences OCPD, I think. Angela, this was so helpful. I didn't realize the connections in my body. Yeah, right? Oversleeping or constant exhaustion. Those typically are more related to depressive symptoms rather than to anxiety symptoms. So hypersomnia is more related to depression than to anxiety, but constant exhaustion, absolutely. When you think about the stressors that are being put on our body physically through anxiety, just the increase in cortisol and the increase in inflammation and the increase in just activation of the brain to try to manage that, it is very exhausting. So oversleeping, not so much. Exhaustion, absolutely. Other questions? Other questions? I really appreciate, that folks pop in to do this. Next week in our second session on the Anxiety Toolbox, we're going to be talking about automatic thoughts and unhelpful cognitions and what those really are. So that'll be the kind of the next step if you're interested in joining us next Friday afternoon. I believe that the posters said that it was an hour-and-a-half session. It is in fact an hour-long webinar with a half-hour kind of scheduled for any kind of Q&A that might come up. Mix of symptoms. Brain tumor surgeries. So, okay, that's really interesting. So you've had some cognitive deficits as a result of brain tumor surgery, but there may be also some anxiety symptoms that are kind of cross-sectional there. And that's really interesting, right? And when we've had a major traumatic surgery, that does sometimes cause some kind of cascading or waterfalling of symptoms. So it's a really good conversation to have with your family doctor or with your neurologist around which of these symptoms are related to the physical aspects of my surgeries, for example, and which of these symptoms are more related to my emotional mental health. That's really interesting, Lori. Thank you for sharing that. I'm not going to answer, yes, okay, perfect. The question around signing up, because that's outside of my scope. Perfect. You are automatically signed up. Super. Yeah, sometimes anxiety can show up in kind of forgetting things, that forgetfulness, forgetting how to spell certain things, forgetting people's names, for example. I know that when I was at the peak of my anxiety, I had severe postpartum anxiety, and I tend to be a fairly articulate person with a large vocabulary, and I would struggle to find words. I would be like stumbling trying to find the words, and it would be easy words, like really easy words, and I wouldn't be able to pull them out of my repertoire. So that's one of the ways for sure that anxiety can show up. And again, there are kind of these commonalities of symptoms, there are commonalities of experience, but then there are unique things that happen from person to person. So, you know, if forgetting easy things like spelling words is happening, I would definitely want to have a conversation about that with your counselor or therapist, but I would also want to rule out anything physical, right? Because that can be an indicator of physical ailments as well. So I'd want to be really aware that there's maybe not a neurological condition as opposed to a mental health condition. Does that make sense? Does that answer your question, Lynn? Yes, Angela, right? It's that sense of can't get the words, can't find them. And it's really debilitating, because one of the things that can happen with anxiety is that self-esteem starts to take a tumble, right? It starts to plummet. And so then when we're struggling to find words, or we can't make connections, or we feel like we've forgotten something or misplaced something, that can really impact the self-esteem, which then amplifies the anxiety because the negative self-talk starts spinning like crazy, right? So it's a really enmeshed set of experiences. Other questions? Any other questions? Oh, you're so welcome, Marie. Very, very welcome. Thank you for being here. Thank you all for attending. Certainly appreciate it. I hope you all have, I'm looking out here, it looks like gray, but I'm hoping for sun for the long weekend. I hope you all have a wonderful time and get some well-deserved rest. I'm sure everyone has been feeling the what's called the allostatic load of living in isolation, and I just really wish you all just the most wonderful, relaxed, and connected weekend. If that's all, then I will bid you farewell and see you next Friday as we talk about automatic thoughts and unhelpful cognitions. All right, take care, everyone.